Here we have a Kodak 35 RF. The RF stands for Rangefinder, and this is it's a very odd looking camera. Lots of bits protruding and, exposed gears. And all of that was actually for a very good reason. And to understand that reason, we've got to go a little further back in Canon history, and we're going to go back to the Kodak 35. Now, this was a camera that was, fairly popular for Kodak in the, kind of like early to mid 30s. And it's not a bad camera. It's got some pretty simple features to it. It's pretty basic, simple to operate. So it was one of those cameras that just did well. It sold well for them. But the problem was, in 1939, Argus released this. This is the Argus C3, more affectionately known as the Argus Brick because of its size and weight. These are very hefty cameras. But this camera included a rangefinder system, okay? And that allowed you to focus the lens. You no longer had to estimate or guess your focus, which is what you had to do with this. All right, the Kodak 35. There was no way to know where you were focusing. And even though you could dial this focus in from 4 feet to infinity, you had no idea of how far you were from your subject. So actually knowing where you needed to be was difficult in your focus distance. So this solved all that because it provided you with a window where you would focus, and then a window where you would compose and take, right? And this changed kind of the market and the industry. In response to this camera being released in 1939, Kodak released this in 1940, and this was produced between 1940 and 1948. And the theory on why it looks this way, and as far as I understand, there's no official documentation from Kodak on why, but all they did was just took this camera, smacked all this stuff on top, fiddled about here in the front, and now you have a 35mm rangefinder camera. All right, and just like the Argus C3, we have a focusing window and a composing window. So when you're taking a photo, you first eye into your focusing, you dial in your focus. This here adjusts, this arm, this very complicated arm that runs back through here and all this stuff, and you got light coming in from this side, traveling all the way across to here so that you can get to here. It's pretty convoluted underneath here. I've had this one apart too. The one thing you'll notice with this one is it's missing this top cover for the shutter. For some reason, the shutter wouldn't charge when you would advance the film. So I just had to remove the cover, and now you just have to charge it manually every time. Not a big deal, but just adds to the complexity of the camera and the fun of shooting with it. I also modified this one by adding a flash attachment to the top, because I like to use an external light meter, so it kind of gets you in the ballpark. So anyway, so the rangefinder system kind of looks like it's just slapped onto the top, but what that gets you is this kind of ugly yet very beautiful look. It's very mechanical, it's very out there in the open. It's like, look at all my bits. But so when you're shooting with this camera, it's a pretty different experience from using other 35mm cameras, because you can't do everything in one window. You're kind of bouncing back and forth, making sure your focus is right, and then making sure your exposure is right by using the meter on the top. Make sure everything's dialed in on the front, and it adds an extra level or two of complexity to taking photos, but it's kind of enjoyable because it requires you to slow down and think more. And I kind of enjoy that because then I find when I'm shooting with a faster camera, I can actually operate that camera more efficiently at those fast speeds. But that's just me and my dumb brain. So when we're shooting with it, and we charge our shutter, make sure that our aperture is where we want it to be and our shutter speed is where we want it to be. So this big dial here will adjust your shutter speed. This little arrow down here adjusts your aperture. Set those into place. Adjust your, focus through the little window. It's a split prism window. One of the things you'll notice is anytime you're holding this camera, your hand wants to be on this side. Well, if your hand gets in front of this window, all of a sudden you block out your rangefinder window and it becomes difficult to see. It's very kind of awkward to use. So anyway, back to what I was saying about under here. In a typical 35 RF, this is what charges the shutter, right? This whole mechanism here. Not only does it allow the film to advance, engages the sprockets, but then it charges your shutter as well. For whatever reason on this model, or this camera in particular, that system wasn't operational, so I just kind of removed it, and now I just charge my shutter manually every time. So instead of having, this nice cover over top of this area here, mine's exposed so I can charge the shutter. It adds an extra step, honestly, that's unnecessary and kind of difficult, but it makes it, again, a pretty fun camera to shoot with. So, the film door, this slides off completely. It's just a twist lock. Some pretty cool, Kodak sticker on the inside there. But I mean, a very basic, camera, but it gets the job done and does it pretty well. So it's just, it's a fun one to shoot with. If you're looking for something a little different, pick one of these up. I mean, they're not that expensive. Of course, I got this at a flea market, so I think I paid, I don't know, like $5 for it or whatever. But you can find versions online, and online prices are all over the place. So I can't really tell you how much you would spend on one, or how much you should spend on one. That's totally up to you. But if you're looking for something different to shoot with, pick up a Kodak 35 RF and, have some fun, see what you can produce with it.